When I came home from the meeting about my late husband's will, I found my wedding photo buried in the kitchen trash beneath coffee grounds and eggshells, and taped to the refrigerator was a note from my daughter-in-law that said, "The downstairs guest room should be enough space for you now." I stood there for a long moment with my hand still wrapped around my purse strap, staring at those words as if they belonged in someone else's house instead of mine. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and burned toast. Sunlight spilled across the marble countertops I had picked out with my husband 22 years earlier, back when Daniel was still in high school and used to sit at that very island doing his algebra homework while I cooked dinner. I slowly opened the trash can and pulled out the silver frame. The glass had cracked diagonally across my face. Harold's smile was still untouched. Somehow that hurt more. I wiped coffee stains from the corner of the photograph with the sleeve of my cardigan while my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with realization. Upstairs I heard footsteps. Vanessa's footsteps. Calm. Unhurried. Comfortable. The kind of footsteps a woman makes when she already believes the house belongs to her. "Oh," she said when she appeared at the top of the staircase, pretending surprise. "You're back already." Her voice carried that polished sweetness she used around church friends and waiters at expensive restaurants. I looked up at her, still holding the broken frame against my chest. "Why was this in the trash?" I asked quietly. Vanessa glanced at the photo as if it were an expired grocery coupon. "The frame was damaged," she said with a shrug. "I figured it was time to update some things around here." Update some things. I repeated those words silently while looking around the kitchen I had spent half my life building. The pale blue curtains above the sink. The cookbook shelf Harold made for me one Christmas. The tiny scratch near the stove from when Daniel dropped a cast iron pan at 16 and looked so terrified afterward that Harold and I had laughed until tears rolled down our faces. Suddenly the room no longer felt warm. It felt staged. Rearranged. Claimed. "Where's Daniel?" I asked. "Upstairs working," Vanessa replied quickly. "He's been stressed all afternoon." I nodded slowly even though something inside me already understood the truth. My son knew about the note. Maybe he had even watched her tape it to the refrigerator. I set the broken frame carefully on the counter and noticed something else then. My favorite ceramic mug was gone from the drying rack. The family photo that usually sat beside the microwave had disappeared too. In its place stood a new framed picture of Daniel and Vanessa smiling on a beach somewhere, her hand resting possessively against his chest. No sign that I had ever existed between them at all. I walked slowly toward the staircase, my knees aching from the long afternoon downtown at the attorney's office. Harold's lawyer had spent nearly 3 hours reviewing documents, signatures, accounts, and legal terms that blurred together after a while. At 71, grief exhausted me faster than age ever had. But even through the exhaustion, one sentence from that meeting kept echoing in the back of my mind. "Your husband made several revisions during the last year of his life, Mrs. Carter." At the time, I thought it was simply another detail about taxes or property transfers. Standing there now in my own kitchen, holding my cracked wedding photo while my daughter-in-law watched me with cold patience from the staircase, I began to wonder if Harold had seen this coming long before I did. That evening, the house felt unfamiliar in ways I could not fully explain. Not louder. Not colder. Just absent of something that used to live inside it. I sat alone at the kitchen table long after Vanessa disappeared upstairs, staring at the cracked photograph beside my untouched cup of tea. The clock above the stove ticked steadily through the silence. Harold used to complain about that clock when we first bought it at a flea market outside Portland, nearly 15 years ago. He said it sounded too loud at night. Then after a few months he stopped noticing it completely. That was the thing about marriage after 38 years. Together. The little irritations slowly became part of the comfort. I wrapped both hands around the mug, trying to warm my fingers. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the backyard deck. Harold built himself one summer after Daniel graduated college. I could still picture him out there, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, measuring cedar boards while country music drifted from an old radio balanced near the flower beds. Daniel had helped him for exactly 20 minutes before getting distracted by a baseball game on television. Harold laughed about it for years afterward. "That boy inherited your attention span," he used to tease me. I smiled faintly at the memory before the smile disappeared just as quickly. Upstairs I heard footsteps again. Then laughter. Vanessa's low voice. Daniel answering quietly. They sounded comfortable. Relaxed. Like two people discussing furniture placement instead of deciding what to do with the widow downstairs. Around 9 o'clock, I finally climbed the staircase to my bedroom. Though halfway down the hall I stopped so suddenly my knees nearly gave out beneath me. My bedroom door was open. It was never open. Harold always closed it before bed because he said the hallway light bothered his sleep. I stepped inside slowly and felt the air leave my lungs. The room had changed. Not dramatically. That was what made it worse. The framed watercolor painting Harold bought me in Vermont was gone from above the dresser. The cream-colored throw pillows had disappeared from the bed. My jewelry tray no longer sat on the vanity table beside the perfume bottle Daniel gave me one Christmas when he was 23 and working his first real job. In their place sat Vanessa's things. A leather makeup bag. A scented candle. A stack of folded yoga clothes neatly arranged on my chair near the window. I stood there in silence while my heartbeat pounded hard enough to make my ears ring. Then I noticed the closet door slightly open. Half of my dresses had been moved aside. Vanessa's coats hung between them. Bright colors. Expensive fabrics. Newer everything. Oh good, you saw it. I turned sharply. Vanessa leaned against the doorway, with one arm folded across her chest. Saw what? I asked quietly. She smiled in that patient way people smile at children and difficult elderly relatives. Daniel and I thought it made more sense if we started combining spaces gradually. The downstairs guest room is easier on your knees anyway. I looked at her for a long moment. This is still my bedroom. Well, she replied softly, technically the house belongs to Daniel now. The words settled into the room like dust. Calm. Casual. Cruel precisely because of how calmly she said them. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something clearer. Because for the first time since Harold died 3 weeks earlier, I understood that grief was no longer the heaviest thing inside this house. The next morning, I woke before sunrise to the sound of cabinet doors opening downstairs. For a moment, half asleep beneath the heavy quilt Harold and I bought during our trip to Montana years ago, I forgot everything that had changed. Then I opened my eyes and saw Vanessa's beige coat hanging inside my closet beside my winter dresses, and reality settled over me all over again. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed while pale morning light stretched across the hardwood floor. My joints ached more lately. Harold used to joke that rainy Oregon weather added 10 years to both of us every winter. I reached for my glasses on the nightstand and noticed something else missing. The framed photo of Daniel at 8 years old dressed as a scarecrow for his elementary school fall festival was gone. I stared at the empty space for several seconds before standing up carefully. Downstairs, the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the hallway. Vanessa was standing in the kitchen wearing cream-colored workout clothes and scrolling through her phone while eggs cooked in a skillet. She glanced up briefly when I entered. "Morning," she said without smiling. "Good morning," I replied quietly. I moved toward the cabinet where I kept the oatmeal, but when I opened the door, everything had been rearranged. My tea tins were gone. The soup mugs Harold bought me every Christmas had disappeared from the shelf. Even the cereal boxes had changed places. It was such a small thing, but suddenly I felt like a visitor searching through someone else's kitchen. Vanessa slid eggs onto a plate and sat at the island without offering me any. The silence stretched between us while rain tapped softly against the windows again. Finally I asked, "Where are my tea tins?" "Oh," she answered casually, taking a sip of coffee. "I cleared out some of the clutter yesterday. The pantry was getting crowded." Clutter. The word landed harder than it should have. Those tins had traveled with Harold and me through 4 different homes over nearly 4 decades. One came from Seattle. Another from a little shop outside Boston during our 20th anniversary trip. But to Vanessa they were clutter. I opened the pantry slowly. 3 shelves near the bottom were now empty except for a few canned vegetables and an old baking dish. Everything else had been moved higher, out of reach unless I stretched. I stood there quietly for a moment before closing the door again. "Daniel left early," Vanessa said suddenly. "He has meetings downtown all day." I nodded even though she had not asked a question. She studied me over the rim of her coffee cup. "You know," she continued carefully, It might actually be healthier for everyone if we start thinking realistically about the future. I looked at her. What does that mean? It means this house is too much responsibility for someone your age. Her tone stayed soft. Professional almost. Like a financial advisor discussing retirement plans. The stairs alone worry me. I stared at the rain sliding down the backyard windows while she continued speaking in that calm voice that never once sounded openly cruel, which somehow made everything worse. There are beautiful senior communities outside Salem, she said. Private apartments. Organized activities. Transportation services. Women your age seem very happy there. Women your age. Not mothers. Not widows. Not family. Just women your age. I folded my hands together to stop them from trembling. Harold built this house for us, I said quietly. Vanessa gave a small sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. And now Harold is gone. The words settled heavily into the kitchen. Simple. Clinical. Final. At that exact moment, I realized something that frightened me far more than the missing photographs or rearranged shelves. Vanessa was not acting impulsively. This was organized, planned carefully long before the funeral flowers had even died. That afternoon, I drove alone to the small waterfront park Harold used to love near the edge of town. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the sidewalks damp and shining beneath pale gray clouds. I sat on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the river while cold wind moved through the pine trees behind me. Harold and I used to come here every Sunday morning with coffee and paper cups after Daniel moved out for college. Back then, we talked about retirement trips and grandchildren and whether we should finally replace the old station wagon that rattled every time we drove over 40 miles per hour. I could still hear Harold laughing beside me sometimes if I closed my eyes long enough. I sat there for nearly an hour watching ducks drift slowly across the water, while replaying the last few weeks in my mind. Tiny moments that had seemed harmless at the time now felt sharp and deliberate. Vanessa insisting on handling funeral arrangements herself. Vanessa answering Daniel's phone whenever I called. Vanessa telling guests during the reception after the memorial service that I was having a difficult time adjusting whenever I tried joining conversations. Even Daniel had changed slowly in ways I had refused to notice before. He stopped sitting beside me at dinner. He rushed through our phone calls. 2 days after Harold died, he told me it might be simpler if I let Vanessa organize the household finances temporarily because paperwork stressed me out. At the time, grief made everything foggy enough that I nodded without thinking twice. Now the memory made my stomach tighten. Around 4 o'clock my phone rang. Howard Mills, Harold's attorney. I stared at the screen before answering. Mrs. Carter, he said gently. I hope I am not interrupting. No, I replied quietly. I was just out for some air. There was a brief pause on the line. I have been reviewing several additional documents your husband left with our office, Howard continued carefully. There are a few matters I think deserve a private conversation. My grip tightened around the phone. What kind of matters? Another pause. Your husband made certain revisions during the last year, specifically regarding the estate and residential property. I looked out across the river while cold wind pushed strands of silver hair across my face. Did Harold think something was wrong? I asked softly. Howard exhaled slowly before answering. Your husband was a very observant man. Those words stayed with me after the call ended. A very observant man. Harold noticed everything. Small things other people overlooked. The cashier shortchanging someone at the grocery store. A leak beginning beneath the kitchen sink before any water became visible. The way Daniel stopped looking directly at me during family dinners over the past year whenever Vanessa answered questions on his behalf. Suddenly memories began fitting together differently inside my mind. Last Thanksgiving, Vanessa laughed when I accidentally dropped gravy on the tablecloth and said, maybe next year we should simplify things. Christmas morning, she gave me slippers and vitamin supplements while Daniel received an expensive watch. During Harold's final weeks in the hospital, Vanessa repeatedly asked whether all the legal paperwork had been finalized yet. At the time I assumed she was trying to help. Sitting there beside the river now, I realized she had been measuring something, timing something, waiting. I drove home just before sunset. The house glowed warmly through the front windows as I pulled into the driveway. From outside everything looked peaceful. Safe. Like the kind of home where family gathered around soup on rainy nights and grandchildren decorated Christmas cookies in December. But as I stepped through the front door, I immediately noticed another change. The framed family portrait that had hung in the hallway for nearly 12 years was gone. Only a pale rectangle remained on the wall where sunlight had not faded the paint. I stood in the hallway staring at the empty space on the wall longer than I should have. The absence of the photograph unsettled me more than seeing it destroyed would have. It was the family portrait we had taken during Harold's 70th birthday dinner 3 summers earlier. Daniel stood behind me with his hand resting on my shoulder, while Vanessa smiled beside him in a pale green dress that matched the table decoration she insisted on choosing herself. At the time, I remembered feeling grateful that my son had found someone organized and confident. Now I wondered how many moments inside that photograph had already been dishonest. I slowly removed my coat and walked toward the living room. The lamps were on, casting soft golden light across the furniture Harold and I spent years paying off piece by piece. Vanessa sat curled neatly at one end of the sofa typing on her laptop while Daniel stood near the fireplace with a glass of sparkling water in his hand. The television played quietly in the background, though neither of them appeared to be watching it. Daniel glanced up when I entered. "Hey Mom," he said carefully, like someone approaching unstable ground. "Where is the hallway portrait?" I asked. Daniel looked immediately toward Vanessa before answering. It happened so quickly most people probably would not have noticed it. But I did. "We moved it upstairs for now," he replied. Vanessa thought the hallway looked cleaner without so many frames. Cleaner. The same word she used for my tea tins. My mugs. My memories. I nodded once and sat slowly in the armchair beside the window. Rain had started again outside, tapping softly against the glass while the heater hummed through the vents. For a few moments nobody spoke. Then Vanessa closed her laptop. "Actually," she said brightly, "Daniel and I wanted to discuss something with you tonight." My stomach tightened immediately. Daniel lowered his eyes toward the fireplace instead of looking at me. "What is it?" I asked quietly. Vanessa folded her hands together in her lap with practiced calm. "We have been thinking a lot about the future," she began. "About what is practical for everyone long term." There it was again. Practical. Future. Long term. Words that sounded responsible on the surface while quietly removing me from the center of my own life. "You have been through so much emotionally," Vanessa continued. "And maintaining a large property at your age can become overwhelming very quickly." I looked at Daniel. "Do you agree with this?" He exhaled heavily before finally meeting my eyes. "Mom, nobody is trying to hurt you. Nobody is trying to hurt you." The sentence almost made me smile because people only say those words when damage has already begun. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "There is a beautiful senior community about 30 minutes outside the city. We toured it last spring for Daniel's Aunt Linda." Last spring. Harold had still been alive last spring. I kept my expression calm even though something cold spread slowly through my chest. "You toured retirement communities while my husband was still alive?" Vanessa's smile flickered for half a second before returning. "Just exploring options. Planning ahead is important." Planning ahead. Suddenly Howard Mills' voice echoed again inside my mind. "Your husband was a very observant man." I glanced toward the staircase leading upstairs to the bedroom Harold and I shared for nearly 4 decades. Then I looked back at the two people sitting comfortably in the living room, as if discussing weather forecasts instead of dismantling someone's life room by room. And for the first time since Harold's funeral, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining things. I was not. They had already decided where I belonged. The only problem was that neither of them yet understood what Harold had already decided first. The following morning, I woke to the sound of drawers opening downstairs before sunrise. Not the slow familiar rhythm Harold used to make while searching for coffee filters before church on Sundays. These movements were sharper, faster, purposeful. I stayed still for a moment beneath the blankets listening carefully as cabinets opened and closed in the kitchen below me. Then came the sound of cardboard boxes sliding across the hardwood floor. I sat up immediately. Pale gray light filtered through the curtains while cold air drifted softly from the hallway. My chest tightened before my feet even touched the floor. When I reached the kitchen 20 minutes later, 3 large moving boxes sat near the dining room entrance. Each one had black marker written across the side. Storage. Donate. Guest room. I stopped walking. Vanessa stood near the counter arranging flowers into a glass vase as if nothing unusual was happening. What is this? I asked quietly. She looked over her shoulder with mild surprise. Oh good, you are awake. I was going to explain everything after breakfast. My eyes moved slowly toward the boxes again. I recognized the knitted blanket folded inside one of them immediately. Harold's favorite blanket from our cabin trips in northern Washington. Another box held framed photographs. My photographs. Why are my things packed? I asked. Vanessa set the flowers down carefully before answering. We are starting to reorganize the upstairs rooms. Daniel needs a home office now that he is working remotely more often. Her voice remained calm and practical, like someone discussing seasonal decorations instead of dismantling a widow's life before 7 in the morning. You went into my room? I asked. Daniel helped, she replied smoothly. I looked around the kitchen. Daniel was nowhere in sight. Of course he was not. Vanessa always delivered the difficult conversations alone while Daniel conveniently disappeared behind meetings, errands, or conference calls. Where is he? I asked. Jim, she answered. He wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict this morning. I almost laughed then. Not because anything felt funny, but because the sentence itself revealed more truth than she intended. Avoid unnecessary conflict. Meaning they both already knew exactly what they were doing. I walked slowly toward the nearest box and lifted a framed photograph from inside. It was the picture Harold kept on his desk for nearly 20 years. Daniel at age 10 holding a fish twice the size of his arm while smiling proudly into the camera. I ran my thumb gently across the glass. This was not yours to pack away, I said quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms loosely. Evelyn, nobody is erasing you. But this house cannot stay frozen forever. Just because Harold passed away. Passed away. As if 38 years of marriage could be summarized with 2 detached words spoken beside a vase of grocery store flowers. I carefully returned the photograph to the box. Then I noticed something else. The china cabinet doors stood open. Empty shelves reflected pale morning light where my wedding china had once been displayed. Where are my dishes? I asked. Storage unit, Vanessa answered casually. Nobody uses formal china anymore. I stared at the empty cabinet while something inside me slowly hardened into clarity. Harold had built that cabinet himself the year Daniel graduated from college. Every shelf measured by hand. Every hinge adjusted twice because he wanted the doors perfectly even. Vanessa had erased it all in less than a month. You should try to think positively, she continued. Downsizing can actually feel freeing for people your age. People your age. Again. Not mother. Not family. Just a category she wanted removed before it became inconvenient. My phone vibrated suddenly inside my cardigan pocket. Howard Mills. I glanced at the screen while Vanessa continued adjusting flowers behind me. Then I answered quietly. Mrs. Carter, Howard said carefully. I believe it is important that we meet privately today. There are several estate conditions your son and daughter-in-law do not appear to fully understand. I looked slowly toward the boxes lined across my dining room floor. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief rising inside me. Not anger. Not fear. Certainty. Howard Mills asked me to meet him at a small cafe 2 blocks from his office downtown. The place smelled like cinnamon and dark roasted coffee beans, and soft jazz played quietly through ceiling speakers while rain streaked across the front windows. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a booth near the back corner where nobody would overhear us. At 71 years old, I had never imagined secretly meeting my late husband's attorney would become part of my weekly routine. Yet somehow it felt less exhausting than sitting inside my own house pretending not to notice pieces of my life disappearing one shelf at a time. Howard arrived carrying a leather briefcase tucked beneath his arm. He looked older than he had during the will reading only days earlier. More serious too. After ordering coffee, he slid several folders across the table toward me but kept one hand resting firmly on top of them. Before I show you these documents, he said carefully, there is something your husband specifically instructed me to explain in person if certain circumstances developed after his passing. I felt my chest tighten slightly. What circumstances? Howard studied me quietly for a moment before answering. Harold became concerned during the final year of his life that pressure might eventually be placed on you regarding the house and estate. I stared at him without speaking. Outside, headlights reflected across wet pavement, while people hurried beneath umbrellas along the sidewalk. He noticed changes, Howard continued gently. Conversations, behaviors, financial discussions involving Daniel and Vanessa that troubled him. I lowered my eyes toward the folders resting between us. Harold really had seen it coming. Somehow that realization comforted and saddened me at the same time. What exactly did he do? I asked softly. Howard finally opened the top folder. Your husband transferred the property into a protected family trust 6 months before his death. I blinked slowly. A trust? Yes, he replied. And the conditions are extremely specific. He adjusted his glasses before continuing. You retain full residential rights to the home for the remainder of your life. No one can remove you, pressure you to relocate, force downsizing, or alter ownership access without violating the trust agreement. For several seconds, I could only hear the low hum of conversations around us, and the distant hiss of milk steaming behind the coffee counter. Daniel does not know this? I asked quietly. Howard shook his head. Your husband instructed me to disclose those conditions only if necessary. And now it is necessary. Howard gave a small nod. Mrs. Carter, there is another clause you should understand very clearly. He slid a second document toward me. If any beneficiary is found attempting emotional coercion, housing intimidation, or financial manipulation against you after Harold's death, their inheritance rights may be permanently suspended. I read the sentence twice because the words barely felt real. Emotional coercion, housing intimidation. Harold had named the behavior before it even happened. Suddenly memories flooded back with painful clarity. Harold watching silently while Vanessa answered questions directed at me during Thanksgiving dinner. Harold asking strange casual questions about retirement communities one evening after Vanessa left brochures on the kitchen island by accident. Harold sitting awake beside me during one sleepless night 3 months before his heart attack, staring quietly at the dark hallway outside our bedroom. What if people only become honest when they think you are no longer useful? He had asked unexpectedly. At the time I thought grief and aging had simply made him reflective. Now I realized he had already been protecting me. Howard leaned forward slightly. There is one more thing, he said carefully. Your husband requested documentation if any concerning incidents occurred after his passing. I looked up slowly. Documentation. Messages. Recorded conversations. Evidence of pressure or mistreatment. For the first time in weeks, something inside me became completely still. Not broken. Not grieving. Focused. I thought about the boxes labeled storage sitting in my dining room. The missing photographs. The retirement community conversations planned while Harold was still alive. Vanessa calmly deciding which parts of my life qualified as clutter. Then I folded the documents carefully and placed them back inside the folder. I understand, I said quietly. And for the first time since Harold's funeral, I finally did. When I returned home that evening, the house was unusually quiet. No television. No music from Vanessa's phone drifting through the kitchen speakers. Even the air felt tense somehow, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something. I hung my coat carefully beside the front door and immediately noticed another detail. My rain boots were gone from the mat beneath the staircase. Small thing. Almost meaningless. But by then, I understood the pattern well enough to know every disappearance carried intention behind it. I walked slowly into the kitchen and found Daniel sitting alone at the island staring down at his laptop. He looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes. His tie loosened. For a brief moment, seeing him there reminded me of the little boy who used to wait at this same counter after school, asking whether I could make grilled cheese sandwiches before soccer practice. But that version of Daniel seemed very far away now. Hi, Mom, he said quietly without looking up. Hello. I opened the refrigerator slowly. Several containers labeled with my handwriting had disappeared from the shelves. The soup I made 2 days earlier was gone too. Vanessa is upstairs getting ready, Daniel said after a moment. We are having dinner guests tonight. I turned toward him. Dinner guests. Her brother and sister-in-law, he answered. She probably forgot to mention it. Forgot to mention it. Again the language of polite exclusion. I closed the refrigerator gently. What time are they arriving? About 30 minutes. I nodded slowly even though nobody had asked whether I minded strangers filling the house Harold built, while my own belongings disappeared into storage boxes upstairs. Daniel finally looked at me then, and for the first time in weeks I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt. Uncomfortable and quick, but there. Mom, he began carefully. Vanessa is just trying to make things easier for everybody. Easier. Such a harmless word for something that felt so cruel. Is it easier for you too? I asked softly. He hesitated long enough to answer without words. Upstairs, I heard Vanessa moving around our old bedroom. Closet doors opening. Drawers sliding shut. You know she means well, Daniel added finally. I almost asked him whether he truly believed that himself, but instead I simply nodded once and walked upstairs without another word. The bedroom door stood open again. Vanessa's dresses now occupied more closet space than mine. New decorative pillows covered the bed Harold bought during our 25th anniversary trip to Chicago. Even the scent inside the room had changed. Lavender perfume instead of Harold's cedar aftershave lingering softly through the furniture and blankets. I opened my nightstand drawer and froze immediately. Empty. The leather jewelry case Harold gave me on our 30th anniversary was gone. So was the small velvet box containing my mother's wedding ring. My pulse quickened sharply. I crossed the room toward the dresser. More empty drawers. Carefully folded sweaters missing. Family photo albums gone from the lower cabinet beside the window. For one terrifying moment, I thought perhaps everything had already been thrown away. Then I noticed a yellow sticky note attached neatly to the mirror. Moved downstairs for convenience. Convenience. That word again. I stood there staring at the note while anger finally stirred beneath the grief for the first time since Harold died. Not loud anger. Not explosive. Something colder. More dangerous. Because suddenly I could see the full shape of what Vanessa had been building all along. She was not simply reorganizing a house. She was rewriting ownership. Rewriting history. Rewriting my place inside this family room by room, until eventually even Daniel would stop remembering the difference. My phone vibrated softly inside my cardigan pocket. A text from Howard Mills. Please do not sign anything they place in front of you. And document everything. I read the message twice before slipping the phone back into my pocket. Then I looked slowly around the bedroom that no longer felt like mine and realized something important. Vanessa believed grief had made me weak. Harold, however, had spent 40 years teaching me the value of patience. Vanessa's guests arrived just after 7 carrying bottles of wine and expensive pastries from a bakery downtown. Their laughter filled the house before the front door even fully closed behind them. I remained upstairs for several minutes listening quietly while dishes clinked below and Vanessa slipped easily into the role of gracious hostess. Every sound felt strangely distant, like overhearing another family's dinner through apartment walls. Eventually I walked downstairs wearing the navy blue cardigan Harold always said brought out my eyes. The conversation softened slightly when I entered the dining room. Vanessa stood beside the table arranging cloth napkins while her brother Mark uncorked wine near the kitchen island. Evelyn, Vanessa said brightly, you remember my brother and his wife Claire. I nodded politely and took my usual seat at the far end of the table, or what used to be my usual seat. Someone had moved my place setting to the corner nearest the kitchen doorway. Vanessa sat where Harold once sat instead. For a moment, nobody seemed to notice the silence that followed. But I noticed. Daniel noticed too. He glanced quickly toward me before lowering his eyes again. Dinner moved forward with forced normalcy. Mark discussed property values rising outside Portland. Claire talked about remodeling projects. Vanessa laughed easily while serving rosemary chicken onto white ceramic plates that were not mine. My wedding china remained locked somewhere inside a storage unit, while strangers ate dinner in my dining room beneath the chandelier Harold installed himself 27 years earlier. Honestly, Mark said midway through dinner while sipping wine, bigger homes become a burden after a certain age anyway. Vanessa smiled faintly without looking directly at me. Exactly what I keep saying. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I continued cutting my food slowly into small pieces. There are amazing retirement communities now, Claire added cheerfully. My coworker's mother moved into one last year and absolutely loves it. Retirement communities again. The conversation no longer even bothered hiding itself. Vanessa folded her napkin carefully beside her plate. Some people resist change even when it is better for everyone. Better for everyone. I lifted my eyes toward her calmly. Everyone? I asked quietly. She gave me that same practiced smile. You know what I mean? No. I knew exactly what she meant. And for the first time I also knew something she did not. Howard Mills had emailed copies of the trust documents that afternoon. I had spent nearly 2 hours reading every page carefully in the quiet corner of a bookstore cafe. Before coming home, Harold had protected far more than the house itself. The trust controlled financial distributions, maintenance access, ownership authority, and inheritance rights. Any documented attempt to pressure, isolate, or remove me from the property triggered an immediate legal review process. Vanessa believed she was slowly positioning herself as owner of this house. In reality, she was building evidence against herself one dinner conversation at a time. Evelyn has had a hard time adjusting. Vanessa continued gently to her guests as though discussing someone fragile and absent-minded instead of a woman sitting 3 feet away. We are trying to make the transition easier for her. Transition. Such a clean little word for displacement. Daniel finally spoke then, though his voice sounded strained. Maybe we should talk about something else. Vanessa looked at him with brief irritation before smoothing her expression again. I am only trying to help. I watched them quietly across the candlelight flickering between us. Harold used to say the truth about people usually appeared during ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. Not during funerals or emergencies. During dinners. Money discussions. Seating arrangements. Tiny choices repeated consistently over time. I glanced toward the hallway where our family portrait used to hang, and suddenly felt something unexpected settle inside me. Peace. Not because anything hurt less, but because confusion was finally gone. They believed grief had left me helpless. They believed patience meant weakness. And neither of them yet understood that Harold had spent the final year of his life quietly preparing me for this exact table, this exact conversation, and this exact mistake.